Chapter 7 Central Secretariat Organization and Function. The Central Secretariat stands for the complex of departments or ministries whose administrative heads are designated as secretaries and whose political heads are ministers. In this unit, we shall briefly trace the evolution of the Secretariat and describe its structure and functions. The tenure system and the staffing of the Secretariat will also be discussed. Under the Secretariat, there is a network of agencies which are responsible for the execution of the government policies. The relation between these agencies and the Secretariat will also be explained in this unit. Evolution of Central Secretariat. To begin with, the Secretariat in India referred to the office of the Governor General in British India. However, the size of the Central Secretariat and the scope of its activities have undergone considerable change over the last 200 years of its evolution in keeping with the changes in the aims, objectives and the nature of the central government in India. At the end of the 18th century, the central government consisted of a Governor General and 3 councillors and the Secretariat of 4 departments. Each of them was under a secretary, and there was a chief secretary heading them all. 100 years later, on the eve of Montfort reforms in 1919, the government of India consisted of a Governor General and 7 members, and three were nine secretarial departments. There were 9 secretarial departments. This number remained the same till the outbreak of the Second World War 1939. Prior to 1919, the central government, while administering certain subjects directly like the army, posts and telegraphs and railways, had by and large left the task of implementation of other subjects to the local provincial governments. A major change came in the above position with the inauguration of the reforms of 1919, which for the first time made a division of functions between the central and provincial governments. Both the central and provincial governments became responsible for both policy and administration. As a result, the role of the Secretariat began to change from a merely policy formulating, supervising and coordinating agency to that of an executive agency as well. The inauguration of provincial autonomy in 1937 and the outbreak of the Second World War accelerated the above process. In consequence, there was a 4-fold increase of the Central Secretariat and its total strength rose to about 200. The Government of India was still struggling with the post-war problems of demobilization and reconstruction when independence came, accompanied by the partition of the country. At its very inception, therefore, the new government found itself faced with tremendous problems like rehabilitation of refugees from Pakistan, external aggression in Jammu and Kashmir, integration of princely states into the Indian Union, internal security, shortage of essential articles at a time when there occurred serious shortage of personnel due to the British officers returning home and many Muslim officers opting for Pakistan. Soon after, the adoption of the goal of a welfare state made unprecedented demands on the already overburdened administrative machinery. At the same time, the industrial policy resolution of 1948 started the process of a vast expansion of the public sector. The inevitable consequence of such a vast expansion in the functions and responsibilities of the government was a marked increase in the number of departments and personnel. Thus, the number of departments in the Secretariat, which stood at 4 in 1858, 9 in 1919, 10 in 1939, and 18 in 1947, had risen to 74 by 1994, correspondingly has also multiplied. Meaning, the Central Secretariat occupies a key position in Indian administration. The Secretariat refers to the conglomeration of various ministries, departments of the central government. The Secretariat works as a single unit with collective responsibility as in the case of the Council of Ministers. Under existing rules, each Secretariat department is required to consult any other department that may be interested or concerned before disposing of a case. Secretaries thus are secretaries to the government as a whole and not to any particular minister. Role: the Secretariat assists the ministers in the formulation of governmental policies. Ministers finalize policies on the basis of adequate data, precedents and other relevant information. The Secretariat makes these available to the ministers, thus enabling him to formulate policies. Secondly, the Secretariat assists the ministers in their legislative works too. The Secretariat prepares legislative drafts to be introduced in the legislature. It engages in the collection of relevant information for answering parliamentary questions and also for various parliamentary committees. Fourthly, it carries out a detailed scrutiny of a problem, bringing an overall comprehensive viewpoint on it, getting approval if required of other lateral agencies like Ministry of Law and Ministry of Finance, and also consulting other organizations concerned with a particular matter. The Secretariat is the clearing house primarily to governmental decisions. Fifthly, it functions as the main channel of communication between the government and the other concerned agencies like Planning Commission, Finance Commission, etc. And lastly, the Secretariat also ensures the field offices execute with efficiency and economy the policies and decisions of the government. Structure of Secretariat. The Central Secretariat is a collection of various ministries and departments. A ministry is responsible for the formulation of the policy of government within its sphere of responsibility as well as for the execution and review of that policy. A ministry for the purpose of internal organization is divided into the following subgroups with an officer in charge of each of them. Department: Secretary, Additional Special Secretary. Wing: Additional Joint Secretary. Division: Deputy Secretary. Branch: Under Secretary. Section Officer. The lowest of these units is the section in charge of a section officer and consists of a number of assistants, clerks, typists and peons. It deals with the work relating to the subject allotted to it. It is also referred to as the office. Two sections constitute the branch, which is under the charge of an under secretary, also known as branch officer. Two branches ordinarily form a division, which is normally headed by a deputy secretary. When the volume of work in a ministry exceeds the manageable charge of a secretary, one or more wings are established with a joint secretary in charge of each wing. At the top of the hierarchy comes the department, which is headed by the secretary himself, or in some cases by an additional or special secretary. In some cases, a department may be as autonomous as a ministry and equivalent to it in rank. Department or ministry. The distinction between department and ministry may be explained by referring to ministry as the minister's charge and department as the secretary's charge. Although a ministry stands for the minister's charge, its administrative divisions are not uniform. A ministry may not have a department or may have one or more than one department in which it is formally divided. While a department may be referred to as the secretary's charge, all secretaries, although they get the same salary, are not necessarily of equal rank. A ministry may have two or more secretaries, each in charge of a specified segment of the ministry's work or of a department in it, but there is in addition one secretary who is head of and represents the entire ministry, although all of them are secretaries. The former are subordinate to the latter, who in addition to his own work coordinates the work of these secretaries of departments or segments of work within the ministry. Functions of different grades of officers of the Secretariat. At present, the grades of officers in Central Secretariat are as follows. Number 1, Secretary. Number 2, Additional Secretary. Number 3, Joint Secretary. 4th, Deputy Secretary. 5th, Under Secretary. The first 3 grades constitute what is administrative parlance may be called top management, while the grades of Deputy Secretary and Under Secretary are referred to as middle management. The Secretary is the administrative head of the ministry or department and the principal advisor to the minister. He represents his ministry department before the committees of Parliament. He is supposed to keep himself fully informed of the work of his ministry department by demanding weekly summaries on the nature of cases disposed of by lower levels and the manner of their disposal. Where the charge of a secretary is too large, he may be assisted by a joint or additional secretary who formally functions as secretary in relation to the subject allotted to him in the ministry or department. The function of the latter is to relieve the secretary of a block of work and to deal, where necessary, direct with the minister. The secretary, however, is invariably kept informed on all these direct dealings with the minister, for he is not formally relieved for his responsibility as head of the ministry or department. The deputy secretary is an officer who, as his designation implies, acts on behalf of the secretary. He should dispose of as many cases as possible on his own. Only on more important cases he should, in fact, must seek the secretary's instruction either by referring to him in writing or discussing with him orally. The under secretary should dispose of minor cases on his own. He should submit more important matter to the deputy secretary in such a form that the latter is able to deal with them quickly. It must be stressed here that the functionaries at these different levels are supposed to perform their functions, keeping in mind the interests of the government of India as a whole. The secretary, in other words, is the secretary to the government of India, not to his minister alone. This is true of lower levels as well. Tenure system. The system of filling senior posts in the Secretariat by officers who come from the state or from the central services for a particular period and who, after serving their tenure, revert back to their parent state or services is known as the tenure system. It has been a principle of Secretariat staffing since 1905 and continued by the Government of India even after independence. The reasons for the continuance of the system may be summed up as follows. Number 1. A joint pool of officers at the reserve of both the center and the states helps in administrative coordination at the center and state level and exercises a unifying influence on the functioning of our federal policy. Second, the Central Secretariat benefits from the administrative experience of a number of bureaucrats who have first-hand work experience at the district and state levels. Third, a prolonged stay in a secretariat may get senior bureaucrats out of touch with actual administrative reality at the field level. The tenure system enables them to get a constant feedback from the field and from the general public. Fourth, the states also benefit from having at their service senior experienced officers with a wide national perspective on all problems. Fifth, under the tenure system, most officers are promised a chance of work at the Secretariat, thus equalizing opportunities for all. Sixth, it strengthens the independence of the civil service. It is a check against the possible dangers of subservience by a few to the political masters for narrow personal gains. Though the tenure system is still in operation, many arguments have been put forth against it. They may be briefly summarized as below. Number 1. Bureaucratic work in the secretariats is gradually becoming specialized. The tenure system is essentially based on the myth of the superior efficiency of the generalist civil servant. Second, district experience is really not necessary in many areas of secretariat work. Third, the tenure system has led to the bureaucrats getting too dependent on the office establishment to get things done. This had led to over bureaucratization of the Secretariat. The tenure system, however, was never prevalent in all the departments of the Government of India: Foreign Affairs, Indian Audit and Accounts, Post and Telegraphs, Customs and Income Tax departments had been the well-known exceptions even during the British period. The creation of the Central Secretariat Service has thrown a new challenge to this practice even in departments where tenure system officially operates. The specialists whose numbers are increasing in the Secretariat are also not subject to rotation to areas away from the Secretariat. The creation in 1957 of the Central Administrative Pool has also made a significant impact on the system. This pool was established by the selection of officers from the Indian Administrative Services. There are two categories of posts in it: general purpose and specialized. The pool system was meant to overcome the uncertainties in the matter of quality and quantity inherent in the tenure system. Finally, despite the tenure system, there are numerous officers in the Secretariat who have never gone back to their parent state. Therefore, the original intention of the tenure system does not necessarily hold good in the changed conditions today. Classification. The executive agencies may be classified into the following types. Number 1. An attached office. Example goes the Indian Council of Agricultural Research, New Delhi. Second, subordinate office. Example goes Inspectorate of Explosives, Nagpur. Third, departmental undertaking. Example goes Ordnance Factories. Fourth, a company registered under the Companies Act. Example goes Hindustan Steel Limited. Fifth, a corporation or board set up under a special statute. Example goes ONGC, Tea Board, etc. Sixth, a society registered under the Societies Registration Act. Example goes Institute of Foreign Trade. There are also instances of executive agencies functioning as an integral part of the ministry itself. Example goes Directorate of Exhibition in Ministry of Commerce. These are, however, exceptions. Relation between executive agencies and the Secretariat. The existence of Secretariat as an entity separate from the executive agencies is based on the belief that the task of policy making needs to be separated from that of its execution. Development administration must necessarily move towards decentralization, which means that effective power and authority must be processed by the executive agencies. Though the number of executive agencies have steadily risen over the years, there has not been an increase in their power corresponding to their responsibilities. It is common knowledge that Secretariat performs a lot of policy executing tasks of an original nature which could readily be passed on to the executive agencies. However, what need to be noted is that the relations between the Central Secretariat and the executive agencies have been quite strained and tension-ridden instead of gradually becoming cooperative and amiable. There are 6 principal patterns of relationship developed at the central level between the Secretariat and the executive agencies. These may be briefly discussed here. Number 1. There is complete merger between the ministry and the heads of executive departments. The examples are the Railway Board and the Ministry of Railway, the Posts and Telegraphs Boards and the Ministry of Communications. This pattern is most suitable for organization undertaking work of an operational or commercial nature. Second, in the second pattern, a senior officer of the ministry concurrently operates as head of the executive department. In this way, he becomes responsible both for formulation of policies and for its implementation with the assistance of the common office located in the ministry. The additional secretary in the Department of Agriculture is the Director General of Food. But the main disadvantage of this pattern is that the system completely blurs the functions of the Secretariat and the head of an executive department. Third, the Ministry's office is merged in the office of the executive department. The common office serves both the Secretariat offices and the officers of the executive office. The advantages of this arrangement are that any administrative proposal is examined only once, thus expediting the disposal of cases, and secondly, it results in sizable economy. Office maintenance becomes more economical. Fourth, the Ministry and the Executive Department continues to have separate officers but have common files and common file bureau, all located in the organization of the executive agency. This pattern has significant advantages, but it does not do away with the problems of separate offices with duplicate staffs and double scrutiny. A good example is the Ministry of Defense and the Air Force headquarters. The Ministry and the executive departments continue to have separate offices and separate files, but the head of the executive office is given an ex officio secretariat status. Thus, the textile commissioner is the ex officio joint secretary in the Ministry of Commerce. This pattern has the following advantages. Under this arrangement, there is considerable saving of time as well as the paperwork, as every matter does not travel up to the Secretariat for finalization. Also, the accepted policy is implemented in a more efficient manner, as the head of the office, because of his secretariat status, is fully aware of the background in which the policy was framed. Its major drawback, however, is that it goes against the fundamental principle of secretariat system, namely policy making must remain separated from policy implementation. Sixth, both the ministry and the executive agency have separate and distinct offices and files of their own, and consultation between them occurs through self-contained letters. This is the standard pattern both at the center and in the states. This pattern is based on the dichotomy between staff and line. The ministry is staff, the executive office is line. An example is Directorate General of All India Radio in relation to the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting. Each pattern has thus advantages as well as disadvantages. No hard and fast rules can be laid down regarding the pattern of relationship which could be appropriate to a particular sphere of governmental activity. The pattern has to be so tailored as to suit the nature of activities or the past experience of the organization. Nevertheless, neither absolute separation nor absolute merger of both is normally desirable. Subordinate offices. A subordinate office functions as the field establishment or as the agency responsible for the detailed execution of the decisions taken by the government. A subordinate office normally functions under an attached office, but where there is no attached office under a ministry, it operates directly under the ministry. The criteria of classifying a certain organization as the attached office and another one as the subordinate office are neither well defined nor consistently followed. Although it is the subordinate office which is responsible for the execution of the policy or decisions of the government, it has been accorded a distinctly inferior status as is indicated by the level subordinate. The pay scales of personnel in subordinate offices are the lowest and their future prospects are not bright. The employee in these offices very often do the same type of work and possess the same qualification as the secretariat personnel. Despite that, the subordinate offices continue to be accorded an unreasonably lower status.